again. We're continuing our study of the Messianic prophet Isaiah, who prophesied in Judah from about 740 BC to 690 BC, a 50-year ministry. And we come today to chapter 36, which is the historical section, chapters 36, 37, 38, and 39. And we have a kind of catalyst between the injunctions against all the nations that were in God's plan of salvation and their hostility toward him. And then the king who was the go-between between the Assyrian and Babylonian reigns. And this king, Hezekiah, in the 14th year of his reign, Assyria invaded Judah. This is 701 BC. And in 2 Kings 18, you have the same record of Hezekiah's reign. And perhaps Isaiah even wrote that. And in 2 Kings 18, 14 through 16, you'll read somewhat of Hezekiah's repentance, which is not mentioned here. And when the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, came up against Judah, he eventually surrounded Jerusalem where King Hezekiah was enthroned. And the king of Assyria, verse 2, sent Rabshakeh. Now that's a title, not a name. That's like saying the general of the Assyrian army, the Rabshakeh. It's a military title. From Lachish, that's where the army completely was settled with Sennacherib. He will eventually go and take another town while the Rabshakeh goes to Jerusalem to ask them to surrender, or to order them to surrender, really. Well, the Rabshakeh came from Lachish to Jerusalem unto King Hezekiah with a great army, and he stood by the conduit of the upper pool and the highway of the fuller's field. Now, 2 Kings 18:7. Now, Hezekiah sends messengers out to meet this general. And the general is shouting. And if we've ever had a picture of the attitude of the devil, it's in this general. And I always picture him with his lips curled in a sneer as he mocks Hezekiah, as he mocks the Jews, as he mocks God. And we'll listen to the Rabshakeh as he talks to these messengers that Hezekiah sent out to him. Then came forth unto him Eliakim, Hilkiah's son, which was over the house, a kind of secretary of defense, and the scribe, Shebna, and Joach, Asaph's son, who was recording all the events. So you've got a man who knows the law, a scribe. You have a kind of defender, and one writing it all down. And the Rabshakeh said unto them, Say ye now to Hezekiah, Thus saith the great king. He's talking about Sennacherib. The great king is God. But of course, the Rabshakeh doesn't know him. Thus saith the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is this wherein thou trustedest? How rude he is. He gives no deference to Hezekiah. He just tells Hezekiah, Where is your confidence? You shouldn't have any. He's talking to the king of a nation, but he's very rude. He doesn't say, King Hezekiah. He just tells, you go tell Hezekiah. Well, he's the king there, Rabshakeh. I don't care. We'll just go tell him. I say, sayest thou, but they are but empty words. This is the Rabshakeh talking. I have counsel and strength for war. Is that what you're telling yourself, Hezekiah? That you can go to war? You think you've got strength and you've got the wisdom? Now on whom dost thou trust that thou rebellest against me? He's bragging, this Rabshakeh. He's bragging. Yahweh is no counsel, no strength for you. Now let's keep in mind that these Assyrians believed that Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, was just a God of Judah, a national God. not the God of the universe, the only true and living God. That's not how they thought about him. So thou trustest in the staff of this broken reed on Egypt. The Rabshakeh knows that Hezekiah sent messengers, envoys to Egypt, trying to get them to help him against Assyria. And so evidently they conquered some of those people or found out this message somehow. He said, you lean on that Egyptian, it will go into his hand and pierce it. The Egyptian can't help you. He's nothing but a broken reed. He is weak. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all that trust in him. The Rabshakeh's mocking Hezekiah. Every effort you've made to defeat us has come to nothing. You can't even depend on Egypt. They can't help you. And certainly you can't depend on God. He can't help you. In fact, Egypt will do you more harm than good. It will pierce through your hand. It will hurt you to trust in Pharaoh. But just tell me, Hezekiah, go ahead and tell me, we trust in Jehovah Elohim. Is it not he? You go ahead and tell me you trust in God, and I'll tell you we've already taken most of his altars. In fact, you took them away. Now the Rabshakeh is confused. When Hezekiah did some reforming in Judah of getting rid of the false idols, the Rabshakeh thinks he was getting rid of Jehovah's idols. And so he's all confused here. But nevertheless, he's telling Hezekiah, you can't trust in your God. You took him away anyway. And said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar. So the Rabshakeh is all confused. He's mocking God. He's mocking Hezekiah. He's really proud of this army he has. In fact, he says, I've already defeated your God. So you pay me tribute. You pay it to Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. I'll tell you what, you pay me tribute and I will watch him lie to Hezekiah. I'll give you 2,000 horses. Then he says, if you had anybody that could ride one, if they'd be able, and I part to set riders upon them. He is sarcastic, he is evil, he's mocking Hezekiah. In 2 Chronicles 31:1, we have this statement by the Rabshakeh repeated, and 2 Kings 18:4. Well, you did away with your God, and I'll tell you what, you pay me tribute, and I'll give you all these horses. Of course, you don't have anybody who can ride them. Sennacherib wrote in his records that at this point he had Hezekiah shut up like a bird in a cage. That is a part of archaeological history. Now, you don't have anybody who can ride a horse. How are you going to turn away one of my squads? How are you going to turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants? I think I'll send a private against you because you won't be able to defeat him anyway. The Rabshakeh is very proud. He thinks he's going to win. You put your trust in Egypt for chariots and for horsemen, and you don't even have anybody who can ride a horse. The background of this is a statement that Moses made about the kind of king Israel should have had. A godly king, one who copied the law, one who did not make military efforts. Deuteronomy 17. But Israel wanted a king like the nations. That's what she got. These kings tried to make foreign alliances, try to defeat their enemies. That didn't work. These kings didn't turn to God. Even Hezekiah's reforms didn't go all the way. He never removed the idols at Dan and Bethel that Jeroboam the first had put in place. So the Rabshakeh is a little confused, and he well should be. Hezekiah wasn't as faithful as he should have been. And you brothers and sisters, when a Christian isn't as faithful as he should be, that makes the world confused about our relationship and about God. And this Rabshakeh, as arrogant as he is. Now the Rabshakeh goes even further here against Hezekiah and actually brags that the Lord sent him to do this. And am I now come up without Yahweh against this land to destroy it? Yahweh said unto me, go up against this land and destroy it. And actually, he's correct. God did use Assyria against Israel. But he's working from a terrorist kind of thing. You think about the way terrorists think today, that God sent them to do these evil acts. This is the Rabshakeh. He's a terrorist. And in essence, he's going to be stopped by God because God is sovereign. Then said Eliakim and Shebna and Joab unto Rabshakeh, Speak, I pray thee, unto thy servants in the Aramaic, the Syrian language. Their reasoning is that the Jews behind the wall who are listening to this terrorist, who are probably scared to death, don't understand Aramaic. And if he'll talk in Aramaic, he won't scare those people behind the wall so badly. But the Rabshakeh, of course, is wanting to scare the people behind the wall. But the reasoning of these messengers of Hezekiah is, Speak in the Aramaic, for we understand it. It was the language of diplomacy. And speak not to us in the Jews' language, Hebrew, in the ears of the people that are on the wall. The diplomatic language is known to us from Saphira inscriptions that date to about the 8th century before Christ, about this time. And so we're familiar with the Aramaic. We know what it is, the diplomatic language of the day. But the Rabshakeh says, yeah. He replies with disdain. Rabshakeh said, Hath my master sent me to thy master and to thee to speak these words? I came here to tell you this. I'm not going to speak in a language they don't understand. That's why I came. Hath he not sent me to the men that sit upon the wall, that they may eat their own dung, drink their own water with you? I'm going to tell you what we're going to have your people do, because they're not going to get any food from us. We're going to starve them out. We're going to lay siege to this city and starve you. It's what we came to do. So I want them to hear me. He's the devil in disguise, is he not? He is really an ugly, ugly person. Then Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice, I'll tell you what, I want them to hear me. And in the Jews' language, yes, he's shouting it now, and said, Hear ye the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. These three who came from Hezekiah must have shuddered, watching this man with this huge army behind him, shouting at the people behind the wall and scaring them, telling them they're going to starve and they won't have anything to eat but their own excrement. Then saith the king, Let not Hezekiah deceive you. He will not be able to deliver you. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in Yahweh, saying, The Yahweh will surely deliver us. Don't ever let him tell you this city will not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. He's yelling this at the wall. Well, Hezekiah isn't really the king, and neither is Sennacherib. The one that's hearing all of this is the king, the lawgiver, the judge, our king, the Lord. And he hears all of this, that the Rabshakeh is shouting at his people. And the Rabshakeh yells, Don't listen to Hezekiah. For thus saith the king of Assyria, Here's what we'll do. You make an agreement with us, you come out here and surrender, and you bring a present, a tribute, and you come out here, every one, and you'll have plenty to eat, you'll have a pleasant place to live. He's lying. You know how to tell if the devil's lying? He's talking. You know how to tell if the Rabshakeh's lying? He's talking. He's lying. If they come out to be slaves, to die. 1 Kings 4:25 mentions what it means to live under a fig tree. That is, to have a pleasant life. That's what he's promising. Won't happen. And he's shouting this at the wall. He said, You'll have a pleasant place to live out here, and then I'll come and take you away to a land like your own, a land of corn and wine. He's lying. They will be slaves. They will be caused to die in slavery. They will be made to do hard labor. But he's a liar. He's promising just to win the battle without losing a man. Beware, he says, he's shouting, lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, Jehovah will deliver us. Jehovah will deliver us. Yes, he will. But then the Rabshakeh makes a statement. They've defeated so many villages, so many towns, so many places. He thinks they can beat any god of any nation anywhere. And some of these villages had their own gods. There were so many gods in those days that small villages had them for themselves. There were towns with the name of El on the end, or Bel, and so on. And they were all defeated, he says, and they've all been delivered into the hand of the king of Israel. You think about Hamath, we beat that god. You think about Arphad, we beat that god. You think about Sepharvaim, we beat that god. Have they delivered Samaria? We beat that god. You're Jehovah up there, we beat him. In 721 BC, Sargon II took it. Pul invaded it. Sargon II won the battle there. He said, we beat all those gods. You think we can't take yours? Who art thou among all the gods of these lands that have delivered their land out of my hand? That the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand. We're too powerful, Hezekiah. You people behind the wall, you can't win. Come on out and bring tribute, and I'll give you a pleasant life. He's lying. And he's shouting it. He's arrogant and sarcastic and evil. And he's a picture for us of the devil's tactics. To deceive by what looks good. Looks good to live out there. We don't have any food back here. Let's go out there. Let's go outside the wall. He promised us a wonderful life. The messengers do something wonderful. I love this line. They held their peace. You can't reason with Satan. They held their peace. They answered him not a word. Years ago, some of the brethren, good brethren, were attacked by other brethren. And the eldership's advice was, don't answer. And they weren't answered. The evil attacks were not answered. And time has proved that to be the right approach to evil. You really can't argue with unreasonable people. And so they do a wonderful thing here. Good advice. Hezekiah had given them this advice. Don't answer them. Don't answer him. Good advice. It's what Christ did before Herod. You're not going to answer that fellow. You can't reason with a man who wants you to do a miracle just to see a miracle. Do your trick there, Jesus, for me. Not going to happen. He didn't answer Pilate until Pilate said, do you not know that I have the power to destroy you? He said, you wouldn't have any power to me at all if the Lord hadn't given it to you. Sometimes you cannot reason with unreasonable people. As much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. But there are times, elders, there are times, preachers, when we just shouldn't answer. Because you're dealing with evil, and there is no answer to it. Just be quiet. Let the Lord take care of it. Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil, Paul said. The Lord reward him according to his work. And so sometimes it's just a good practice not to answer. Because there is no answer that would satisfy evil attack. Then came Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, that was over the household. These three envoys of Hezekiah come back, and Shebna the scribe, Joab, the son of Asaph, the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes torn. They're mourning. To tear the clothes, to rip the pocket or something, was a sign of mourning. They are so saddened by what they're hearing, frightened by what they're hearing, they know we're going to be destroyed. And so they tell him, and Hezekiah could hear this guy shouting, but they report anyway what the Rav Shaki had said. And what did he say? Blasphemy. He was speaking against God ultimately. And let that be a warning for us, that when we attack God's people, we're actually speaking against God. When we speak ill of the church, we're speaking ill of the Lord. You remember that Paul was persecuting the church, and the Lord said, "Why are you persecuting me?" Acts 9:6. Well, he had never met the Lord. But the Lord took it personally when Saul persecuted the church. So I have to be careful about my attitude toward elders and deacons and preachers and brethren, good brethren. Be careful about my attitude toward folks. Make sure I understand. Are they just mistaught or what? They have a problem? Maybe I can help, and so on. We have to maintain a good attitude toward God's people. Here's a great example of the way the devil goes about his business. He lies. He promises what he does not intend to deliver. And he is one who would mock God in a second. He blasphemes. Now, when King Hezekiah heard this, he tore his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth. And he does a good thing. He does a very good thing. He goes into the temple. Where could he go but to the Lord? Hearing this kind of a message. Esther, where are you going, knowing that your people are under attack? She went into the temple. The penitent Hezekiah turns to God. What other place could he go for help? And he sends Eliakim and Shebna over to Isaiah's house. That's interesting. Hezekiah goes to the temple, but he sends his messengers to the preacher. These men who had been out there and heard this Rav Shaki's boasting and blasphemy and sarcasm and mocking, it was known to Isaiah already. And the amazing thing here we're going to find out is Isaiah already knew what the answer was before these men ever came to him, because God was talking to Isaiah directly through the Holy Spirit. Well, they came to Isaiah and they said unto him, "Thus saith Hezekiah, this day is a day of trouble, of rebuke, and of blasphemy, for the sons are come to the birth." The trouble has given birth. What we feared has come upon us. We're under attack. And there's no way for us to give birth to a solution to this problem. Interesting proverb there. The children came to birth. Well, here's the problem, and we don't know how to solve it. And you tell Isaiah, it may be the Lord thy God. That's interesting, the way he tells those men to talk to Isaiah. You tell Isaiah to say something to the Lord. We know he's your God, Isaiah. We're not sure he's ours. I don't know if Hezekiah means that, but I know they're troubled. And maybe they doubt here. But it's interesting the way they say it to him. That maybe the Lord thy God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom, of course God heard it, whom the king of Assyria, his master, has sent to reproach the living God. I suppose they think that they're going to get God more on their side by asking Isaiah to tell God what this guy said. God already knows what he said. And will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard, wherefore lift up thy prayer for the rest of us that are left. They're actually pleading with Isaiah to ask God to help them. So they come to Isaiah. And Isaiah's ready for them to come. He already knows why they're there. They don't even tell him why they came. He just says, go back and tell your master, that's Hezekiah. Thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard. What a great answer from the preacher. Don't be afraid. Well, you know what he said? I said, don't be afraid. Well, he said they were going to, I told you not to be afraid. Well, preacher, I'm afraid of death. Don't fear him that can kill the body. Rather fear him who could destroy both body and soul in hell, Matthew 10:28. Why would you fear death? Well, preacher, I'm afraid of this virus. Why? God's in control. Be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard. Be safe. Do the best you can and let God take care of the rest. Wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria hath blasphemed me. See, God already knew what they said. Isaiah already knew what the envoys were going to tell him. And he said, don't be afraid. I'm going to send a blast on him, and he shall hear a report. Sennacherib's going to hear a report. You know what report he heard? Sennacherib, you just lost 186,000 men in your army in one night. And he's going home, as Brother Cates used to say, Curtis Anthony Cates, that Sennacherib ran home after his defeat with his tail between his legs. He returned to his own land, and when he got there, his own sons killed him. And I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. He'll hear a report. He heard a report, all right. Sennacherib, you just lost your whole army to God in one night. So Hezekiah, don't be afraid. I'm not going to let him take the city of Jerusalem. So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah. I told you that Sennacherib had moved from Lachish down to another town, about 10 miles north of Lachish, in fact. And for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish, and he heard saying concerning Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, he is come forth to make war with thee. And when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying, thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceive thee. Tirhakah ruled actually by himself from 693, but he was co-regent from 710. So this is again about 701. Don't you let Hezekiah think that Tirhakah can help you and that you'll be delivering Jerusalem. And you go back and tell him the same thing you've been telling him. We destroyed all the gods of all these other nations, and we'll destroy him too. We destroyed the gods of Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, the children of Eden, which were in Telassar. We did all of that. And he's talking here, and it's recorded for us in 2 Kings 17. In fact, he starts way over by the Mesopotamian Valley and just follows through on all these conquerings. He conquered Hamath and Arphad, and he already has told this. Go back and tell Hezekiah the same thing in a letter. Send him a letter this time. Well, these envoys come back and deliver this letter, and he reads it, Hezekiah does. And he does the one thing he should do. He takes the letter up to the temple and opens it before the Lord, and he starts praying at the mercy seat. The background to this letter is found in 2 Chronicles 32, 16 and 17. But Hezekiah does, again, the thing he should do. He turns to the one true source of help. And he prays at the mercy seat in his mind. O Jehovah of hosts, God over everything, and Israel, you dwell between the cherubims. You're the mercy seat. Our mercy seat today is the Christ, Romans 3. He's the one who takes us into the presence of God. Here, the mercy seat, he's talking about, I'm in your presence, God. He says to God, in the way all people who are God's children pray, he praises God first. Thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You're the Creator. Listen to me, O Lord. Hear me, O Lord. See me, O Lord. And hear what Sennacherib said in this letter. He takes his problem to the Lord. Of a truth, Lord. He's actually telling the truth. He did lay waste all those nations. What about us in Jerusalem? Is he able to do it? Hezekiah's prayer language is lofty. It's reverent. He requests in an imperative. He said, Lord, hear. Not a beg, an imperative. Lord, hear. He is desperate. Lord, hear. He's telling the truth, Lord. He did defeat all those. He did throw all their gods into the fire. All the work that they made. He destroyed them. That's true. But God, you can save us. And he doesn't say you could. He says, save us. It's an imperative demand. Save us. He's desperate. What he said is true. Save us. And then the whole world will know you're really the Lord of all of them. Well, Hezekiah doesn't know it, but Isaiah is made aware of the letter by the Holy Spirit. He's made aware of the prayer by the Holy Spirit, and he sends a message to Hezekiah while Hezekiah is still praying in the temple. And Hezekiah said, save us. And Isaiah, the son of Amos, sent unto Hezekiah, saying, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, whereas thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, this is the word which the Lord has spoken concerning him. Sennacherib, Jerusalem hates you. And she's laughing you to scorn. You're not going into Jerusalem at Sennacherib. And Jerusalem's going, She's shaking her head at you, Sennacherib. It's not going to happen. She is not going to be taken by you, Sennacherib. Sennacherib, to whom do you think you're speaking? To whom have you blasphemed? Did you not know, Sennacherib, you were talking to me, and I'm the God of heaven? Whom do you think you are, talking to me that way? Against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high? Against the Holy One of Israel? Are you talking to me, God said? The Rabshakeh, Assyria, and the Rabshakeh, the servant of Sennacherib, hast thou reproached the Lord? You know what Sennacherib's problem was? He had eye disease. Listen to him. Here's what Sennacherib thought. By the multitude of my chariots am I come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and I will cut down the tall cedars thereof, and the choice firs thereof, trees thereof, and I will enter into the height of his border, and the forest of his Carmel. I have digged and drunk water, and with the sole of my feet have I dried up all the rivers of the besieged places. Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, Sennacherib? Sennacherib, you have eye disease, but I'm the one who was in control of you. And from ancient times, I've always been in control. You say you did it? I did it. I formed it. I brought it to pass. I was in control of you when you laid to waste the defense cities and made them ruinous heaps. This man with eye disease found out who the real I is. God reminded Sennacherib that God allowed his victories. God was in control. Therefore, because I was in control, Sennacherib, the inhabitants of those nations you defeated had no power. It was small power. They were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field and the green herb and the grass on the housetops, as corn blasted before it be grown up. But I know where you live, Sennacherib. When the first President Bush was in power, a fellow named Omar Gaddafi was troubling us out of Yemen. And President Bush ordered a missile to be sent into what he was understanding to be Gaddafi's place of sleeping that particular night. Gaddafi was so frightened that he would move around each night and did not sleep in the same place twice. Well, this particular missile hit the tent where they thought he was, but it killed Gaddafi's son. But it let Gaddafi know that President Bush was saying, I know where you live. God said to Sennacherib, I know where you live. You think you're able to go against me? I know where you live. I know how you won all these battles. I did it. I know when you go out. I know when you come in. And I know your rage against me. Every world leader should pay attention to that. God knows where they live. He knows when they rage against him. Because thy rage against me and thy tumult has come up into mine ears, God says, therefore I will put my hook in your nose. It's going to lead him around. And a bridle in your lips, and I'm going to send you home by the way you came. Isn't that amazing? Sennacherib did go back home. He had to. He was defeated. And this shall be a sign unto thee, Hezekiah. You will eat this year which grows of itself. You're going to have to eat wild food, stuff that just grows. But plant, and next year you'll eat what springs up. And the third year and so on. You've got a future yet, Hezekiah, in Jerusalem. God said so. And the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. When the Memphis School of Preaching moved from the Knight Arnold site out to where we are now on Forest Hill Irene Road, this was our theme. We're taking up root here. We're taking the roots up here, but we're going to bear fruit out there when we plant it again. We had a future out there, and that's where we went. Well, you have a future, Hezekiah, and you will again take root downward and bear fruit upward. The population will be replenished. You'll eat what's wild this year. That's the problem, because you can't plant right now. But after this, you've got a future. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion, the zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. The remnant are under God's protection. Therefore, thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria. Watch this. Sennacherib will not come into Jerusalem. He won't shoot an arrow there. He won't bring his armies of men against it, and he won't put a ramp up to try to climb into it. All of the military efforts that these armies made in those days will not happen to Jerusalem. And by the way that he came, this is the third time now, he's going to go home the way he came. By the same shall he return and shall not come into this city, saith the Lord. Why? For I, God says, will defend this city to save it for my sake, and a promise I made to David. 1 Samuel 7, 11 through 16. God has a purpose yet in Jerusalem, and so he's going to preserve it. Watch what happened. The messenger of the Lord, the messenger of death, went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when the Jews arose in the morning, behold, they, the Assyrians, were all dead corpses. 2 Kings 19. In one night, God kept his promise. Not one Assyrian set foot in Jerusalem. Not one ramp came up against it. Not one arrow shot into it. And Sennacherib went home to Nineveh. And he's worshiping in the temple of his God. His sons Adrimelech, Sharezer, killed him. And they fled because they'd killed the king. And the son of Sennacherib rules Assyria as Esarhaddon does in the place of the killed Sennacherib. What an amazing historical event, and it happened. It's historical. Sennacherib was murdered when he got home. Why did he flee home? What happened to his army? He's got a huge army. What happened to it? What the Bible says happened to it in one night. It would be a terrible thing to be the burial detail for all those people, would it not? What a task that was. In one night, 185,000 dead Assyrian soldiers. Meanwhile, and here I think you have to backtrack in time as you get to chapter 38, to about 713, to a time when Hezekiah had become sick. And the reason for this study has to do with how Babylon knew about the treasures in Jerusalem and why later in her history she would come and take that city which Assyria was not able to take. In those days, about 713 BC, was Hezekiah sick unto death. Now, if Hezekiah dies, this is a serious difficulty in the seed line of Christ, because Hezekiah is of the seed of David, and if he dies, he has no offspring, the seed line would perish. But God's going to protect the seed line, and even though Hezekiah is sick, nearly dead, he will survive according to God's instructions and promise, and he and his wife will have a son they will name Manasseh. And when Manasseh is 12, Hezekiah will die. But this is about now 15 years before Manasseh is born. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death, 15 years before Hezekiah's death, and 3 years before Manasseh is born. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death, and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came unto and said, Set thine house in order. This is going to kill you. Thou shalt die and not live. Isaiah the doctor will make a plaster out of figs, and whatever this infection was that Hezekiah had will be cured. But right now, it looks like it's death for Hezekiah. The parallel account is 2 Kings 20, if you want to read it. Then Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall and prayed unto the Lord. Again, in his deepest trouble, he turns to the Lord, in a rather strange way, though. He's sort of grieving in his own bed here, and said, Remember now, O Lord, I beg thee, how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart. That's not exactly the case, but it's Hezekiah's estimation of himself, and have done that which is good in thy sight. And notice this now. Hezekiah wept sore. He's facing death, and he grieves over his own life. There's an amazing statement made by the Hebrews writer concerning the weeping of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Hebrews 5, verse 7. Hebrews 5, verse 7. The text says there in English, he wept sore. That's out loud. He's grieving so much that he weeps out loud. And according to James 5:13, we should weep that way over our sins and our problems. So here's Hezekiah weeping sore. He's out loud crying. Isaiah tells Hezekiah, well, we have another word for the Lord to add to what we just told you. According to 2 Kings 20, verse 5, 3 days after he's told he's maybe about to die, he's told, you're going to be healed. And God will add unto your days 15 years. So for 3 days, he must have been on his bed weeping sore. Now he's told he'll survive. But in those 3 days, he thinks a lot of things that help us when it comes to grieving. And he wrote them down, what he was thinking when he was told he was going to die. But he's told here, you're going to live, and I'll deliver this city out of the hand of the king. We already know how that happened. And I'll tell you what the sign is. I'm going to bring the sundial back 10 degrees. That is a tremendous miracle. This is divine healing then. But here are the notes Hezekiah wrote down when he was told he's going to die. And it's interesting that he goes through a process here we call grieving. The writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, when he had been sick and was recovered of his sickness. Watch his apprehension, his denial, really. I said, in the cutting off of my days, I'm going to die too young. Everyone thinks that, no matter how old they are, that they are dying too quickly. I've heard people talk about, well, he died prematurely. You can't die prematurely. You can't die before you die. Whether you die 100 years old or 3 years old, you live in eternity just as long because there's no time there. But here is a man thinking in grief, I'm being cut off too soon. He's in denial here, which is part of the process of grieving. I am deprived of the residue of my years. I should have lived longer. When my father was dying of bone cancer, and he, in November, died in February. Diagnosed in November, died in February. Yet when I visited him, he wanted to go down in the basement to tell me what he was going to do when he got well. He couldn't get well, but it's typical of grieving to deny it. I am deprived. And I'm going to miss out on a lot, he says, verse 11. I shall not see the Lord, even the Lord in the land of the living. I shall behold man no more with the inhabitants of the world. I'm going to miss out. I'm dying too soon. My age is departed. And now, he says, God's doing this to me. And is removed from me as a shepherd's tent. I have cut off like a weaver my life. He says, God did this. Why me, God? Why am I sick? You know, folks say that sometimes when they're grieving. Why me? Paul told us something about that. He said, there's no trial taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted tried above that you're able, but will with the trial make a way to escape that you may be able to bear it. If you have a problem, it's no greater than anyone else could ever get. All trials are equal in the fact that they can attack anyone, anywhere, anytime. Nobody's special when it comes to trials of life. Hezekiah thinks, God did this to me. No, God is faithful. And that's the way to escape. Don't ever blame God for your sickness. Let no man say when he's tried, God did this. And don't ever think like that. Hezekiah did here. And sometimes when we're grieving, we get angry at God. Understandable. But Hezekiah will learn something from this experience of grieving. But he blames God right now as he learns, I'm going to be dead in just a few days. He said, I stayed up all night. I couldn't sleep. Grieving does that. God is going to break all my bones, he says. And you're doing this to me day and night, God. And then he says, I sounded like a bird chirping. I know now that what I was saying was meaningless. But in my grief, that's the way I felt. I'm dying too young. God is taking my life away from me. I sound like a bird chattering, don't I? I did mourn as a dove. I kept looking upward. Why me, Lord? Do something. Oh, Lord, I am oppressed. Undertake for me. Oh, Lord, can't you help me out here? Well, the Lord did help him out. Gave him 15 more years. Well, what shall I say? Now he learns. He has spoken unto me, and himself hath done it. I shall go. I'm going to quit complaining now. For the next 15 years, I will remember how bitter I was and remember I was wrong. The makeup of grief is interesting. It's really anger. It's been my privilege in recent years to hold grief seminars for many congregations. But all who grieve feel deprived of something. Something's taken away that they think belongs to them. Hezekiah said, he took my life away before he should have. And they become anxious, and they even can doubt God and get angry at God. And sometimes when we lose a mate or lose someone, we can actually get angry at the mate for leaving, not realizing it's anger. It expresses itself something like this. I told John not to go out in the garden and all that sun. Had he listened to me, he wouldn't have. Well, he would have. But grief does that to us. It makes us angry. We lose our enthusiasm. Well, that's natural. Death is an enemy. It's not a friend. It's an enemy. And we need to learn to mourn, not just grieve. Mourning is the outward expression. Grief's what's going on in our heads. We need to learn to cry. We need to learn to and understand. You get restless when you're grieving. You can't sleep. You can't eat. You forget. You dream. You feel guilty. Lose your appetite. Whatever. But what are we learning? God's with us. Lord, by these things men live. From now on, I'm going softly. And I'm going to remember how bitter I was in my soul. He learned a great lesson. He learned the true characteristics of grief. How helpless he felt. How he had asked why and blamed God. And so when I'm around someone who's grieving, I never say to him, I know what you're going through. Never. Because I do not know what that particular person, with his unique characteristics, his unique temperament, his unique spirituality, his uniqueness all the way around, is going through. And to say that to the person makes them angrier than they already are. I usually tell a person who's grieving, I'm thinking about you. Can you tell me your story? And let them talk. I just said that to a good friend of mine just the other day. Tell me your story. He remembers, Hezekiah does, that for peace he had great bitterness. He remembers what it was like to grieve. But then he says to God, you delivered my soul, my life, from the pit of corruption. And here's the greatest blessing. Not that he's physically well, but that his sins are forgiven. Shock, denial, resentment, all symptoms of grief. Disorganized, confused. I'm sick. I feel empty. I feel cold. Well, tell me how you feel, Hezekiah. And when he wrote it down, he felt better. He wrote down his experience, and I would recommend that to all who are grieving. Write down your experience. Write down what you went through. Think about it. Let it come out here. Share it with someone so that it's not all in here, but it's out here and you're sharing it, and that load is being borne by more than one. And he says, God saved me from my sickness. Couldn't praise you in the grave. Couldn't celebrate you there. But I can praise you now for what you did. And I'm going to tell everybody the truth from now on, he says, verse 19. And the truth is that whatever happens, whether I'm sick unto death, or whether I'm well, or whether things are going badly, or things are going well, God is in charge. And here's what he learned. Here's the greatest line that Hezekiah gives us. He says, as he writes his memoirs, the Lord was ready to save me. He said, I should have remembered that. A lady walked into an office of a preacher, pounded on the desk with her fist and said, where was God when my son died? The preacher said, he was the same place he was when his son died. The Lord was ready to save me. And so I'll sing his praises all the days of my life in the house of the Lord. He's talking about his change of attitude. And how were you cured, Hezekiah? It's rather mundane. Isaiah took a lump of figs, laid it for a plaster on the boil, and recovered Hezekiah. He had an infection, and now he's recovered. And Hezekiah had also said, what's the sign that I'll go up to the house of the Lord? The sundial went backwards 10 degrees. Not impossible with God to stop time, but to turn the sundial backwards, turn time backward, that's really a sign. We've studied about a man named Hezekiah. As we come to the next chapter in the next session, we're going to learn the background of the last chapters of Isaiah. And Isaiah is going to point out that God is doing all of this in order to bring the church of Christ to the earth. Isaiah is going to tell us who the forerunner will be, what kind of a Messiah will come in order to bring this church, and why it is that Hezekiah has mentioned it all. Put Hezekiah in history as a kind of turning point from old Judah to the new one that's coming. And Babylon will have a huge hand in that history. But to me, it's more than interesting that we have such a great chapter on what it's like to grieve. God knows us, and he knows how we feel when we're hurting. And he doesn't condemn us for hurting. He just reminds us, the Lord, he's ready to save. What a great chapter 38 is in terms of helping us. Folks, my memory of this chapter gets me through my periods of grief when we've lost the loved ones in our family. God bless you, and may God add a blessing to this reading of Isaiah.